Hello students, welcome to Rao's IAS Focus Weekly. Today on 20th of February 2025, I'll be discussing the current affairs of the past 1 week. I have covered the current affairs from the date of 13th February 2025 till 19th February 2025. So these are the topics that have been there popularly in the news. So let's see. So we have the topic of Einstein rings. Actually, Einstein rings typically was not in the news. It was the Euclid telescope of European Space Agency that has been in news. So we'll talk about Einstein rings as well as the Euclid telescope. Then we'll talk about the Brahmos next generation. It has been there in the news in the past few years, but this time there has been a confirmation that the first test of the Brahmos next generation missile will be conducted somewhere in 2026. Then we'll talk about some applications of space infrastructure. Although there is, again, this is not a news typically, but this is somewhere we have already found that a lot of applications of space technology are already used in daily life. Now, this is a news related to some of those developments in the same area, right? Then we'll talk about the mRNA vaccines for cancer that Russia has claimed to have developed. In December, this news already got popular, but now as the preclinical trials results have been out, we can discuss the topic of mRNA vaccines and what has been the development in this particular vaccine. Then we'll talk about the trust initiative that has been signed between India and USA, but will be restricting our discussions only to the realm of critical minerals. What are critical minerals? Where are they important? So that part we'll be discussing it here. And like I told you in the previous Focus Weekly that I've started a series of discussing some long-term topics of discussion. So today happens to be the part 2 of data protection law and regime in India. So we'll discuss the data protection law. We'll talk about the data protection rules that were released in January 2025, and also we'll see some of the challenges related to those rules, and eventually we'll be looking at some subsequent topic what I'm going to take up in the next class. All right, so let's start with our discussion. So the first topic of our discussion is related to Euclid Space Telescope. It has discovered new Einstein rings in the nearby galaxy. Now what exactly, so here if you notice that we have some keywords before I start with our conversation here. You can see that we'll first talk about the Euclid Space Telescope. What is this telescope all about? Then we'll talk about Einstein rings, what this telescope has recently identified. So what exactly are Einstein rings? We'll be discussing this topic here itself. So what is Euclid telescope? So guys, remember Euclid telescope as it is given here, it is a telescope that has been developed by or deployed by the European Space Agency. So in 2023, Euclid Space Telescope was one of the latest developments of astronomical research from European Space Agency, and it was launched in 2023. It has been kept at the second Lagrange point number 2, between Earth and Sun's orbit. It is actually a halo orbit around which, so if you look at the Lagrange points are typically those points where the effect of gravity of two bodies is nullified. So whenever there are two bodies, so if there is one body that's the Sun and the other body that's the Earth, Lagrange, who was a famous French mathematician of contemporary to Napoleon's time, he identified that in a two-body situation, there are going to be 5 such points where the gravitational impact of both the bodies can be nullified, right? So he identified those 5 points as Lagrange points, right? So we have one other point which is somewhere here, we call it the L1 point. We have got another point somewhere here, we call it the L2 point. Then we have got 3 points, L3, L4, L5, somewhere around the orbit of planet Earth and Sun. So if I consider Earth and Sun as the two-body situation here, so we have few Lagrange points somewhere here as well, right? So likewise we have got L1, L2, L3, L4 and L5 Lagrange point. Now where exactly, many of you may already be knowing that India ISRO has already launched its first solar observatory, that's called the Aditya L1. It is located at the L1 point between Sun and Earth. Now where is the Euclid Space Telescope is deployed? Euclid Space Telescope is deployed at the halo orbit of L2 point. So what's a halo orbit? Halo orbit is typically not the L2 point but an orbit that revolves around the L2 point. So halo orbit of the L2 point is an orbit that revolves around the L2 point of the Lagrange point 2 between Sun and Earth. So this is the L2 point. It is approximately 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, right? L1 point also interestingly is 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, and around this point, that's the L2 point, we have the halo orbit that revolves around the L2 point, and this particular location is the one where our very own Euclid Space Telescope has been deployed. So when you go and read this particular part, you'll see that this is located at the Sun Earth second Lagrange point L2. And what has been the objective of the Euclid Space Telescope? Its primary objective was to study and explore dark universe. Dark universe primarily mean two things. One is called dark energy and the other part is dark matter. So dark energy and dark matter are the two things which the Euclid Space Telescope is going to be identifying, is going to be studying. Now, while studying these two things, very recently Euclid Space Telescope has released an image of an Einstein ring. So this is the image that has been released, and if you guys can notice here, you can see a kind of a ring shape pattern, a kind of a ring shape arch, you guys can notice, and this ring shape arch is known as Einstein rings. So I hope all of you guys can understand. I would expect you to be writing these things at the same time, because this becomes a very important piece of information, especially from prelims point of view. So remember, Euclid Space Telescope, who has launched it? It is launched by the European Space Agency. Which year? 2023. Its main objective is to study dark universe, and it has been deployed at the second Lagrange point. So because there is already a lot of news related to Lagrange points in the recent years, like we have put up our first solar observatory at Lagrange point number 1 between Sun and Earth. Then we already know about another telescope of USA. It's called the James Webb Space Telescope, that has been also deployed in the L2 point, and this becomes the third telescope, you know, of the recent time which has been deployed again in another Lagrange point, right? That's also L2 for this. Now, what are Einstein rings? What are Einstein rings? So there is no doubt that a ring is supposed to be a ring-like shape, a circular shape. Now, what exactly is an Einstein ring? Now, the concept of Einstein ring is normally understood from a concept of gravitational lensing, right? Those of you who are my students, they may be already knowing that we have discussed something called gravitational lensing in the class itself. Now, what is gravitational lensing? So we'll talk about gravitational lensing first. I'll discuss what exactly this means, and then we'll talk about how an Einstein ring can be expected to be formed, right? It's a very simple concept, very easy to understand. You just have to visualize what Einstein really, predicted at one point, right? So if you're able to visualize it easily, then it would be a piece of cake for all of you to understand. So guys, before I start with my conversation about Einstein rings, let me first talk about what Einstein really gave us. So guys, we are already aware that Einstein gave us the new law of gravitation, or the theory of general relativity, which essentially was adopted as the new way of studying or understanding gravity. So what Einstein says, that universe is like a fabric of space and time. So just like a trampoline, if you guys can visualize that a trampoline is a stretched sheet of rubber, you put some weight on the trampoline gets warped, right? So for Einstein, universe is like a fabric of space and time. So it's like a trampoline of space and time, and if you put any object on the fabric, or if you put any object on a trampoline, the object is going to get warped, right? The object will get warped, and or the object will get depressed. It will bend around that particular, the fabric will get bent around that particular object. Imagine it like this, that if you have a trampoline in front of you, you put some weight on it, the trampoline is going to, the weight will eventually bend the trampoline around itself, and it will create a conical hollow, or a conical space. I hope you guys can understand. So that depression that is going to be produced, it will be produced as per the density or mass of this object that you have put on the trampoline. In the same way, Einstein says universe is also like this trampoline only. It is a trampoline of fabric and space and trampoline of space and time. And if I put any object like the planet Earth or Sun or anything on that particular fabric, the fabric is going to get bent around this object, right? The fabric is going to get bent around this object, and this bending would be on the basis of the mass and density of the object. Let's say, for example, if Einstein believes that universe is somewhat like this, so technically this should be the fabric that Einstein has talked about. So let's imagine this is a kind of a fabric, and if you put any weight on the fabric is going to get depressed. Now these depressions that are going to be produced on the fabric, Einstein called these depressions as warps. Einstein called these depressions as warps, right? So he called these depressions as warps, and on these warps that have been created, Einstein says these warps itself is nothing but gravity. So What is gravity for Einstein? Einstein said gravity is nothing but the arrangement or the pattern of these warps that have been created whenever you put an object. So according to Einstein, when you look at moon revolving around the earth, the moon is revolving around us not because the earth is pulling the moon. The moon is revolving because moon is stuck in the warp created by planet earth. So if this is earth, this is the warp created by earth, and the moon is simply revolving around the earth because of the warp created by the planet, right? So this is typically the idea that Einstein gave. Now, whether Einstein is correct or not, we don't have to negotiate on in this particular discussion. It takes an entire discussion to understand the entire concept of Einstein in depth. In our class lectures, I've discussed this multiple times. We have discussed it in a lot of depth. So I believe all the students would be able to understand this part. But just to brush up their understanding, this is what Einstein believed, that when you put any weight on a fabric of space and time, the fabric gets bent around that weight depending on the mass and density of the object. I hope all of you guys are able to understand. This is what we have under the simple idea of Einstein's concept of fabric of space and time. Now, if gravity is like this, if according to Einstein, universe is like a fabric of space and time, and gravity is nothing but the bending or the warp that have been created, then just think about it. Just think about it for a while. If you consider this as the fabric of space and time, you guys can notice, and if I put any weight on the fabric, you guys can easily see that the fabric has got stretched and bent, right? You guys can notice that the fabric has got stretched, right? On all sides the fabric has got stretched and it has created this depression here, right? All of you, I believe, are able to identify this. Now, if this is how the fabric is stretched, now just look at the space, look at the space that has been created around this object. So imagine if I consider sun here, we all realize that the moment when you put sun on the fabric of space and time, the sun, depending on very high mass and density, it will create a very large and very deep warp, right? It will create a very deep, very large warp, right? And we also understand that objects bigger than the sun, they will create even bigger warps, even bigger, warps or bigger depressions, right? So imagine if we have got a star or a star like our sun here, and we have got an observer here, right? Now, when this particular object is being viewed by this observer, there is no doubt that sunlight would be traveling toward this observer, and as the sunlight reaches to this observer will find the star appearing to him like a dot. If I ask you, how will that observer find the star? If he's looking at this star in the universe, how will this observer find this star in appearance? How will it appear? All of you can easily say that if you try to picture, an object somewhere in the night sky, an object like a star in the night sky, the object will very likely appear to be like a dot. It will appear to be to us like a glowing dot, ek dot ki tarah dikhega, which is glowing. So that's typically what the star should ideally appear. But now imagine if in between this object and the observer, if I place a really heavy object, like an entire galaxy, a very large black hole, or a supercluster of galaxies. So imagine if in between this particular object and the sun, there is a supercluster of galaxies, lot of galaxies. Supercluster of galaxies means a lot of galaxies, 40, 50, hundreds of galaxies are put together. Remember guys, in nature, all the galaxies that we have, they are always found to be in some clusters. The cluster can vary from 2 to 3 galaxies or to even 100 galaxies. We have rarely found a galaxy which lives in isolation. All galaxies that we discovered, they are mostly found in clusters only, right? So ideally, this particular star, it will be throwing light in this direction, and because of this supercluster, ideally this light would have gone straight, right? This light ideally would have gone straight to this observer. But because of this supercluster of galaxy now produced here, it's very obvious that when this particular light would travel, we would know that this supercluster of galaxies would create such a deep warp, it would create such a massive warp around the fabric of space and time, that all this space here will get so deeply stretched, that all the space around this galaxy would be so deeply stretched that it will create a massive warp on the fabric of space-time because of the overall mass and density of these galaxies. Now, when light would start traveling, there is a chance that this light that was moving straight, it may be lost somewhere, in the supercluster's own light. This light that was supposed to travel straight, it may be lost somewhere in the supercluster's light. But what about the other lights that the star is emitting? If you consider any other light released from the star, there is no doubt that the light of the star would be traveling in all directions. But because the light that is supposed to be traveling towards the observer, and because the entire fabric of space and time has got warped so deeply here, that this light, look at this light which is ideally supposed to travel like this, because of the bending of fabric in space and time, this light would eventually stretch and move like this because of the bending of the fabric of space and time, because of the warp that is created around the galaxy. Then this light, which was ideally supposed to move like this, but because of the extreme warping of the fabric of space and time created here, this light will also somewhat go like this. So what will happen? All this light that was ideally supposed to travel like this, it will bend. This light would also go like this. So what is going to happen eventually? This particular observer was earlier supposed to receive only one light. Only this light was supposed to reach the observer in the previous case. But now, because there is a massive denser object that has come up, in between the observer and the galaxy or the source, the light from the source, which earlier would have been only one ray of light, now because of this massive warping, a lot more rays of light would end up reaching this observer from the same source. So basically what is happening is, imagine if there is a very distant galaxy, this galaxy would have been very faint, faintly looking to us. It would have been very dull, the image would have been very dull if the light of that galaxy would have been reaching us. But sometimes gravity can behave like a lens. Sometimes gravity can behave like a lens. And guys, what does a lens do? A lens is simply a device that helps in magnifying the images. It magnifies the images, whatever you're looking at. And secondly, it adds clarity to your vision. It makes the images more and more clear. So a lens is something that actually helps in either magnifying or creates a much more clearer image, of an object. So that is what generally a lens does. So if I'm wearing a lens in this way, I understand with the help of the lens, I'm able to see much clearer objects. And also we can use the lens, not this lens, but otherwise we can also use lens which can help in magnifying the vision. So Einstein found that because of this warping of fabric of space and time, sometimes gravity can also behave like lens. So Einstein discovered a process called gravitational lensing, where sometimes gravity can act as a lens. That means gravity can make objects appear bigger and much more clearer. So how an object can appear bigger or clearer, let's try to visualize this. Now if you look at this image one more time, you saw, or we basically pictured this image in such a way that we realized that initially the star or this object would have thrown only one ray of light. This source from where the light is being sent, it will throw only one ray of light towards the observer. But it's obvious that there would be many other rays of light that this star or this source would have been throwing. So this source would have thrown a lot of different rays of light, but none of these rays of light would have traveled toward the observer, because only one ray of light travels in a straight line, so only one of this ray of light would reach to the observer, right? All of us understand this much. Now the moment I introduced a supercluster of galaxies, the moment I put a supercluster of galaxies, right? In this picture, if I put a supercluster of galaxies where a lot of galaxies are close together, this would create such a deep warp of the fabric of space and time. Thus all these lights which were otherwise traveling in a different direction, not traveling towards the observer, because of the extreme warping of the fabric of space and time, we'll see all these lights showing some inclination, some deviation because of the warping of fabric of space and time towards the observer. Now earlier, when only one ray of light was reaching, the object must have appeared very dull, very faint. But now, as more and more light is reaching towards this observer, this object is going to appear larger. This object will appear larger, it will be much more clearer, and is going to be much more brighter image than would otherwise it wouldn't be possible. Now when you look at this particular situation, you can see that the observer remains the same, the object remains the same, but here the supercluster of galaxies is now acting like a lens, which is basically diverting all these radiations into a single direction toward the observer. And if the observer, the object and the lens, if all three of them are in perfect alignment to each other, then the object will appear like a perfect ring shape, this perfect ring. So this Einstein ring is simply a concept where gravity can sometimes act as a lens, and this becomes a really interesting technique in seeing objects which would otherwise be very faintly looking, otherwise would be highly impossible to observe, but because of some gravitational lensing that occurs between the light or release from those objects to the observer, we are able to observe them, easily, or moving towards us in a form of an arc or a ring like shape. So this is technically what is known as Einstein rings, and you guys can easily understand this was possible only when you start accepting, acknowledging Einstein's view of gravity, right? I hope all of you guys have been able to understand. So this was Einstein rings, but mind my words, Einstein rings have been pictured, we have pictures of Einstein rings already captured by Hubble Space Telescope and many other telescopes before, Euclid. So it's not like this is the first time Einstein rings image has been captured. I hope all of you guys are able to understand. Now the next topic of discussion is Brahmos NG, Brahmos next generation. This is a prototype image of Brahmos NG here. Now the Union Ministry of Defense have already confirmed that the first test flight of Brahmos next generation would be conducted in 2026, and the production will begin from 2027 to 2028. Now this was again a project that was pending since a long time, right? I hope all of you guys are aware that Brahmos has already been regarded as a highly exceptional and a very capable missile system, and it has been jointly developed by India and Russia. So India and Russia together has built the Brahmos missile system. Now Brahmos NG is also going to be the next collaboration between India and Russia in developing the next generation or a better variant of Brahmos missile, right? So NG stands for next generation. This is also going to be a supersonic cruise missile system. What is a supersonic system? A supersonic missile is such a missile which can fly at a speed faster than the speed of sound. So normally we use a methodology called Mach number. A Mach number is basically such a number which helps us identify helps us compare speed of any object with the speed of sound. So if there is an object that has a Mach number of greater than 1, if there is an object that has got a Mach number of greater than 1, that means the speed of this object is faster than the speed of sound. We know that the speed of sound is somewhat equal to 332 meters per second at 0 degrees Celsius. So if this is considered as the speed of sound, any object that can fly fast or that can move faster than this speed is considered as a supersonic object, right? There is also a different criteria for subsonic, hypersonic. So that criteria is not needed here, but just for your knowledge I'll share. We have different nomenclature. So if an object has a Mach number greater than 1, we call it supersonic. But if the Mach number goes greater than 5, right? If the Mach number goes greater than 5, that means it can fly 5 times faster than the speed of light or more, speed of sound or more, then this would be called hypersonic, right? So Brahmos NG, remember, it's going to be still a supersonic missile only. It's not going to be a hypersonic missile, right? So this is going to be a supersonic missile expected to have a speed of 3.5 Mach. speed of 3.5 Mach. That means it will be faster than the previous Brahmos. Let me just tell you that the previous Brahmos, or the generation 1 Brahmos here, it has a speed of 2.8 to 3 Mach. Okay, 2.8 to 3 Mach. It would be a good comparison between this Brahmos and the older Brahmos that we already have in the country. So 2.8 to 3 Mach is the speed of the older version of Brahmos. The range of this missile is expected to be 290 kilometers. Although the older Brahmos also had a range of 290 kilometers initially, but now it has been increased to 450 kilometers. 450 kilometers. And the weight is 1.6 tons, whereas the older Brahmos was heavier. It had a weight of 3 tons, right? So 3 tons is the weight of the older Brahmos. So one can easily understand that this is going to be faster and also lighter. So being faster and lighter simply means that it would have high, engagement rate. It would be easily engaged into lighter combat aircrafts also. Like when you look at the length is 6 meters, although the older Brahmos was 9 meters. So the older Brahmos was longer, was bigger, was heavier, but it was slower. The Brahmos NG is expected to be faster but lighter. So you can understand that being faster and light will add more compatibility of this missile to be deployed alongside or with light combat aircraft Tejas, with Sukhoi 30 MKI. So all these aircrafts which used to find the older Brahmos heavier and bulkier, they can easily carry the Brahmos NG. So I hope you understand this adds more compatibility for a certain missile system. So Brahmos NG boasts as reduced radar cross sections and features an indigenous seeker with AESA radar, enhancing its precision and stealth capability. Now this is another thing that makes Brahmos NG somewhat better than the older Brahmos. This particular Brahmos is having much higher precision and also will have a greater capability of preventing its detection from any radar or surveillance technology. So this is not only faster but also more precise and more secure, or has the capability of remaining secure from any kind of surveillance technique. So this is what makes Brahmos NG a somewhat better variant of Brahmos. And next point is it has high platform compatibility. This is what I just now mentioned. It is possible to launch Brahmos NG from light combat aircraft like Tejas, from Rafale, or even from the Sukhoi MKI 30. Although Rafale is not there in one of the compatible aircrafts, it is mostly Tejas and Sukhoi. But remember, this will be deployed with, or this will be inducted in all the three variants of our Indian military: Air Force, Army, and Navy. All three of them may be having it, but it will be made precisely compatible for Indian and Russian aircrafts. I hope you guys can understand, because it's an Indian and Russian joint venture. The first flight is scheduled for 2026, with the production expected to begin from 2027-28. This is what basically the timeline for Brahmos NG. And remember, this will also be a nuclear capable warhead. So if you are putting a nuclear capable warhead on a missile, it clearly means that this missile will also, or can also be used as a strategic weapon, not just meant for tactical or precision attacking. It can be used also for strategical purposes. Remember guys, a strategic weapon is something that ideally should not be deployed. It is meant to basically scare away the enemy rather than launching it or dropping it on the enemy. So strategic warheads are those which are basically meant to create a pressure on the enemy that we are also capable, and if a full-blown war really happens, then it can cause mutual destruction, right? Irreparable mutual destruction. So that's why we often have strategic weapons. Most nuclear weapons are strategic weapons only, right? So these are Brahmos NG. Then guys, another news that was popular in the last 1 week was some application of ISRO which can be used in our daily lives, right? Now this becomes an interesting question, not only from prelims point of view but also from mains point of view. UPSC can ask questions like this, that how space technology is able to shape some other innovations, or they can ask simply a question that what is the purpose of investments in space when India is already struggling in a lot of social welfare objectives. So these kind of things can be asked in the exam. Even in the class discussion, we often take discussions like these. So let's talk about what has been the news. So guys, before I talk about these things, let me give you a quick overview that what makes space technology so special and why it the innovations of space can actually be deployed in other areas of daily life. So guys, all of you understand that today in the 21st century, I hope all of you would agree with me here that if any country if any country expects to become a developed nation, there is no doubt that without a functioning or without a successfully functioning space program, no country can claim itself as a developed nation. So, to become a developed country today, having a fully developed or having a successful space program becomes a prerequisite, right? So, you will notice that all developed countries today, they do have some presence in space, they do have some investments in space technology. So, there is no doubt that space itself remains a very important, you know, a very important sector of future development, right? And guys, when you talk about the extent to which space technology has been influential, you guys can understand that when you look at innovations like defense technology, defense surveillance, defense intelligence, space technology becomes the primary source from where all these intelligence can be collected. When you talk about information communication broadcasting, high speed internet, with initiatives like Starlink, OneWeb, it is clear that the future of internet belongs to or will come from space technology. Then when you talk about faster communication and cheaper, space obviously provides the cheapest and the fastest mode of communication. When you talk about when you talk about weather forecasting, disaster management, space based infrastructure again is the key factor which has helped India in becoming more disaster prepared, in reducing the casualties after every disaster, especially after disasters like or after calamities like tropical cyclones on the eastern or the western coast of India. So space is already putting up so much contribution is done from space sector. Now guys, if you talk about the year 2025, as I'm taking the class here, you must be aware that there is something called Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. These goals are basically notified by United Nations, but they have been accepted by all the member countries of UN that these are the goals that every country should strive to achieve by 2030. These Sustainable Development Goals, they were a 15-year goal program which was started in 2015 and it went on till 2030. So till 2030, we have to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. There are total 17 goals. There are total 17 goals under SDGs, and all these 17 goals, the world has made a pledge that they will try to achieve by 2030, by 31st December 2030. Now guys, you'll be surprised to know that United Nations also have an office under the Outer Space Treaty. They have got something called United Nations Office of the Outer Space Affairs, UNOOSA. United Nations Office of the Outer Space Affairs. This is an office that has been set up under the Outer Space Treaty of United Nations. According to this office, United Nations Office of the Outer Space Affairs, they have started one initiative calling it Space for SDG. The name of the initiative is Space for SDGs. So Space for SDGs is an initiative where United Nations claims that out of that all these 17 sustainable development goals, space based technology, space based infrastructure can help us in achieving all of them. In fact, if I go by the bifurcation, they claim that almost 10 to 12 of them can be achieved directly with the help of space based technology or space based infrastructure. And if I consider the rest 5 and 7 of them, then they can be achieved indirectly with the help of space-based services. Guys, just to give you a quick example, when you talk about modern transportation methods, modern transportation methods have introduced something called ADAS. You must have heard of it, Adaptive Driving Assistance System. So ADAS is basically a system where a person can have the leverage of, although this is I'm just giving you as an example that a person can have the leverage of getting an assistant while driving. So if there is any situation where suddenly an object comes in between, or if you're driving in a foggy weather and the visibility is very poor, the car itself is looking at all the surroundings. The car will also, so the car is not running just on the steering wheel support of the driver. The car is also having its own system of sensing its nearby environment and making the car move. So if any accidentally, if any animal comes suddenly in between, or if some hawker comes in between, some children come in between, or if there is any dead end of in the road, the ADAS system will be able to read all these things. And even if the driver unfortunately goes to sleep, or if the driver is not conscious to respond, the ADAS will respond. That's the kind of adaptive system. Now guys, this ADAS related technology has already been used in space or in space based infrastructure for more than 20-30 years now. There are already sensors developed which are able to read about their nearby surroundings. They are able to clamp with each other. Like very recently, you must have heard ISRO has conducted a docking experiment where they brought two different units and they docked they docked and eventually locked with each other. So when you look at such kind of experiments, don't you think these things would involve the sophisticated use of sensors, proximity sensors, sophisticated use of these all these range softwares and range based sensors which can help them to understand where exactly the lock has to be made between two objects. So there is already a lot of innovation in the area of space technology which can directly or indirectly be used in our day-to-day lives. So this article that came in the Indian Express was somewhat related to this only, right? So here I'll talk about the possible contribution that space technology in India or ISRO particularly can make. So guys, Department of Space has already identified 155 such technologies that can be introduced in our day-to-day life. But Department of Space, one step ahead of it, in space, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, it is one of the initiative of Department of Space only. They have already identified 166 such technologies that have been developed for various ISRO missions previously that can be used and deployed in our day-to-day life functions. Some examples that are mentioned here, like algorithms that was used for Chandrayaan 3. So Chandrayaan 3, which developed an autonomous landing system where it got separated from the Chandrayaan 3, and then eventually when it fell, the lander, as it fell directly towards the moon, at what distance it has to maintain, what speed it has to maintain, how will it recognize what is the right location to land, all these kind of algorithms that were developed, right? They can really help in automotive industry. So automotive industry using, like I just now mentioned about ADAS and different kind of sensors that can teach the car, that can make a car learn about its nearby environment, so that some kind of autonomous control the car can have even when the driver is not consciously available, right? Then pressure sensors, they can be used, pressure sensors that were used in various ISRO missions, that can be used on checking the airbags and safety protocols of cars or even other equipments. In aircrafts also it can be used, the pressure sensors. Then daily use products like cell phone cameras, air purifiers, memory foam and reflective blankets, which are used in emergency purposes, they are already there, which are developments of space technology which are already popularly used in our day-to-day lives, right? But moving on from here, the 3D LiDAR technology which is already being used to create 3D maps of India, 3D maps of Earth, 3D maps of any landscape, we can use the same technology for in healthcare sector in predicting lifestyle borne diseases. By observing the entire hip, waist or other bodily ratios, we can observe and find out if there is a chance of any lifestyle borne disease. We can use the same 3D modeling in crowd management, in crowd management studies, like when you want to design next level of markets, next kind of amusement parks, or even in order to manage events like Kumbh Mela and such. We can also create cost effective lithium ion batteries. This news on lithium ion battery was already there in 2023 when ISRO for the first time collaborated with an Indian private company to make low cost lithium ion batteries. It is already there, where Indian companies are being benefited. Then guys, when you talk about noise, shocks and vibration dampening technologies, now when you look at noise, shocks and vibrations, you can understand it from the context of seismic studies, that how the earthquakes or making buildings more and more earthquake resilient, making or studying more and more things about earthquakes, we can use the same kind of technology which is used in noise, shocks, or vibration dampening in order to design next generation buildings, right? Then we can talk about, then there is another application of NRCM 204. It's a patented paint. It's a paint that has been patented and developed by ISRO. It is a highly corrosion resistant. So using this NRCM 204 in protecting the metals, metal alloys, or other materials from getting corroded anytime, this becomes a very good technology that can be helpful in a lot of day-to-day appliances. Then we have something called benzoazine. Benzoazine is a polymer that again ISRO has developed. It is meant for insulating and protecting electronics and printed circuit boards. So protecting the electronics from any kind of temperature differences. So you can use this ISRO benzoazine polymer in creating next generation of day-to-day life equipments where the temperature could be very high, could be very low. We can use these kind of insulating coatings inside microwave ovens. We can use that inside refrigerators where the sensors and electronics can function without any worry about temperature changes. So these are some of the things that were mentioned in this article, and I believe all of you are able to also relate this concept with the studies with the initiative of Space for SDG. So a question can be asked from this topic related to, in mains they can ask a question related to how space technology can help in so many day-to-day lives or in various other aspects of sustainable development goals, environment management. In the prelims you can expect a question related to how space-based technology is helping in specific areas. So they can be a relationship between Chandrayaan 3 and the automotive industry. You can expect questions like that also. Now moving on to the next question, this is related to the M-RNA vaccine that Russia developed, and they claim to have developed the world's first vaccine for cancer, and the preclinical trials have released very recently, and they show a very positive outlook towards this new vaccine that has been developed. So let's talk about what is this vaccine and what is the meaning of mRNA vaccines and what are going to be advantages of this particular vaccines. Although guys, there is other research also which is not a Russian university research, it is an American university research. Even they have also found mRNA vaccine to be very effective especially in the case of kidney cancer. In the case of kidney cancer, they have found it to be highly effective. So we maybe, and guys, this becomes why an important topic, because guys, when I talk about the major contributions that science would make in this century, it's not just an innovation of decades, it's an innovation of century. All of us are aware that cancer has been one of the most you can say painful and also one of the most dangerous lifestyle borne diseases. We normally consider diabetes, cancer, hypertension, cardiovascular disorders as lifestyle borne diseases or non-communicable diseases. One of the worst of these lifestyle borne diseases is cancer. And you also know that the therapies that are available for cancer happens to be really painful, right? So, and despite of the therapy, there is always a chance of a cancer relapse. So guys, if we can have a vaccine that can help us in preventing cancer from in future, then you can understand this becomes an innovation of the century, because this will be the first time the human generation can be assured of their complete victory over cancer. I hope you guys can understand. So UPSC should not be ignoring a question on this type of topic. I believe there's a very high chance UPSC can ask, right? So let's talk about what Russia has really done here. So guys, before I talk about this particular vaccine, I'll first discuss what exactly is an mRNA vaccine, right? So what exactly is the meaning of mRNA vaccine and what does it do? So guys, mRNA vaccine, they basically, what is an mRNA? So mRNA stands for messenger RNA. Now, just to give you a quick preview before I talk about this. So remember guys that all the characters that we have in our body, they are shaped by our DNA. I hope all of you would agree to this, that DNA is the primary building block of life, and all the characters that we express, all the characters that we have, they are basically the DNA characters. So they are characters of the DNA that eventually get expressed. So some of us may be tall is because their DNA carries those genes which have the taller genes. right, or which may produce proteins that can help in developing a taller height. Some of us are quite muscular. That means those genes contains those proteins which can help in secreting more muscle. Myoglobin is the name of the protein. So like this, we have all these characters of the body defined. So every character that we have is technically a protein character, and these proteins are basically secreted based on the DNA pattern in our cells. So every cell of our body contains the DNA, contains the nucleus, and nucleus contains the DNA. The DNA would eventually be responsible for carrying all the characters and all the proteins, all the bodily characters that get expressed. Now all these characters that get expressed, these are technically proteins only. These are technically protein characters. So in the process, so guys, please try to understand, in the process of expressing all these characters, the DNA have to undergo a certain process. So the DNA have to undergo certain changes, and those changes involve mRNA in between. So basically, if I say it verbally, although UPSC may not ask this particular question, so I'll just say it verbally, and you should be able to understand it in one go. So we have the DNA which carries the original characters, and we have got the protein which is actually our character, right? So suppose the DNA has to secrete a protein, and that protein is taller height, that protein is muscle buildup, that protein is bone density, that protein is could be anything, could be insulin, all these things. Insulin is also protein, by the way. So when this particular DNA would want to secrete this insulin or this protein, the DNA directly does not produce or synthesize proteins. The DNA undergoes a certain process. So there is a process of DNA replication, then there is a process of DNA transcription, then there is a process of translation. So DNA replication, translation, transcription and translation, that essentially eventually produces proteins, right? So protein synthesis involves a certain process. Now in this process, there is DNA which first undergo replication, and then from replication it converts into RNA. So it synthesizes RNA. So that RNA which is produced, that is produced from your DNA itself, that RNA is called messenger RNA, and this RNA is supposed to carry all your original genetic information. So all the information that your DNA carries, all the information that your DNA is supposed to manifest, they all are actually carried into the mRNA first, and then the mRNA is responsible for producing proteins related to all that information. So mRNA does not originally produces proteins. mRNA is synthesized from the DNA itself. The DNA itself carries or puts the information into the mRNA, and then mRNA behaves as a messenger for all that original information for the actual secretion of proteins. That is done with the help of ribosomes, right? So those of you who are not from science background and have not studied this part, don't worry about it, guys. It is just that remember that mRNA is like a messenger who carries the information of the original DNA into the proteins that are secreted. So in this process of the protein or of the expression that are created, mRNA is acting as a messenger. So whatever message mRNA would carry, those proteins would eventually be synthesized. So you can use this common sense that if there is an mRNA based vaccine created, that means whatever messages the mRNA vaccine would carry, those proteins would ideally be synthesized, right? I hope all of you guys are able to get it. So this is what is the simple meaning of mRNA, right? mRNA. So mRNA vaccines, what they do first, they basically employ a snippet of genetic material to instruct our cells to produce specific proteins that triggers an immune response. So we'll talk about this, don't worry, we'll talk about this part. But before this, I'll first talk about how exactly the mRNA vaccines functions. So guys, mRNA, all of you understand, it is nothing but a small biomolecule that carries the message of the original DNA and eventually helps in producing the proteins which are as per the instructions of the DNA. As per the information in the DNA, it produces proteins. So guys, the idea here is that if there is a person that has been diagnosed with cancer, the cancer cells, they would be taken and they would be studying that what type of cancer cells proteins are there, what type of cancer cells antigens are there. The antigens are basically those proteins which your body do not recognize, So there is a term that you may come across in this write-up. It's called neoantigens, right? There's something called neoantigens. Neoantigens are basically those proteins which are the sites where mRNA can go and attach, right? These are the sites where we can attack these kind of sites. So neoantigens are basically those proteins which are going to be the sites where we have to start secreting the proteins, right? So what happens here, how this particular thing works. So the idea behind mRNA vaccine is, first point, the mRNA vaccines, guys, they got really popular during the time of COVID. So the first vaccines that were introduced for COVID, they were mRNA based vaccines. So I'll take COVID as a basic principle of finding the methodology of making mRNA vaccines. So in COVID, the moment when a person gets infected, right, with a certain virus, the virus starts entering into the cells and it starts infecting the cells. And if the virus starts infecting one after the other cells, then the infection starts spreading in the body and the person and the condition may become fatal. So the mRNA vaccine, what they will do, they will take a specific genetic material of the cells itself. So they will be making the vaccines customizable for each and every person. So they take a certain genetic material, and from that genetic material they will study which is that part of the gene which may get attacked by the COVID virus. So what is that part which may get attacked by the COVID virus? So they will study that particular genetic part, and then what they'll do, they'll create an mRNA that can secrete certain proteins which can kill that virus. So what they'll do, they'll take that mRNA, they'll encapsulate this mRNA with some nanoparticles so that they can remain protected until the insertion is made into the human cells. And once it is put in the human cells, the mRNA will quickly be there will be quickly sent to all the cells. All the cells will eventually have the mRNA through blood. It will be transfused in all the cells, and the moment the virus of COVID attacks the body, the mRNA would quickly detect which is that particular virus, and the moment they observe this particular proteins of the virus, they will quickly start secreting their own antigens, their own antibodies, and the virus may be suppressed, the virus may be killed, right? In this way, the mRNA vaccines are not using an entire pathogen to create immunity, but they use only a small genetic material of the pathogen, and that can help us to create response or protect us against a certain antigen. Now, it may be a little difficult to visualize how this particular mRNA vaccine would function, but this is where I have tried to make it even more simpler to understand how the Russian mRNA vaccine is going to work. So the concept, the goal of this vaccine is to create a personalized therapeutic vaccine that that trains the patient's immune system to recognize and combat their specific cancer cells. So first of all, this method is going to be a personalized therapeutic method. You will have to create a personalized medicines only for this. So every cancer patient will have their own personalized vaccines created. The first thing that they will study is tumor profiling and neoantigen identification. So what they'll do first, they'll first identify the entire cancer cells. They will take the cells and they will profile the entire cancer cells. They will do the entire genetic study of the cancer cells, and they will identify what genes are there which have been infected, or which genes are basically causing the cancer cells to grow, right? So once they will identify those genes would be called neoantigens, because these are going to be the selection sites where the cancer proteins, or where the these will become sites where the proteins have to be synthesized to suppress them. So these are the neoantigens that has to be suppressed essentially with the help of the vaccines. So once we identify these neoantigens are those sites where the proteins are going to be attached, right, to suppress the cancer cells. So once we have identified this for every individual, then the personalization process of their vaccine starts, right? So we will take a sample of their neoantigen, and then we'll start creating their own mRNA, and will synthesize it to produce certain proteins that can kill that particular antigen. So the method is very simple. First is we'll take the genome sequence of a certain cancer cell individually to that patient, and then we'll create a personalized mRNA vaccine for that particular cancer cell. Once the RNA has been synthesized, the vaccine production will start. But here the concept is that first we have to create the mRNA that is meant to produce protein to kill that specific tumor or kill that specific cancer cells, and then once the mRNA is synthesized, we have to cover it, we have to keep it in some lipid nanoparticles so that this mRNA doesn't get damaged until it is put in the human cells. So until it is being put in the human cells, the mRNA will be kept in a lipid nanoparticle capsule. So remember, this also becomes an application of nanotechnology at the same time. So this will become, an application of nanotechnology. So once the mRNA has been personalized depending on your new antigen identification, will make this vaccine, and once the vaccine is created, it is going to be encapsulated in some lipid is basically fat like molecules, in some lipid nanoparticle coating, which will keep the mRNA protected. And after the mRNA vaccine has been developed, now this vaccine is going to be administered into the patient, and the immune response or the immune activation will start. Now guys, this is the process how the mRNA vaccine of Russia works. Remember, it's a personalized medicine. They have also used artificial intelligence in this context, and that is particularly to identify the new antigens in the vaccine, in the cells, and also to optimize mRNA construct. So what will be the best way to construct the mRNA against a certain antigen, and what will be the best way to identify those places or those markers which can help us to see what cancer cells or what area of the cancer cells or what area of the of our proteins or of our genes have triggered cancer in the body. So this is what the Russian mRNA vaccine has been able to do. Now the advantage of having this type of vaccine system is that this vaccine system is going to be 100% personalized, and it will have, because it is personalized to each and every patient, the chances of a side effect would be way less compared to other therapies of cancer. And guys, as per the preclinical trials, the success, the reversal of cancer, the control of metastatic cancer has been high. So it shows that we are very close in creating a vaccine that can really eliminate cancer forever. I hope all of you guys are able to understand. This was the mRNA vaccine of Russia. Then guys, there is a recent initiative in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to US. You must have also observed that India and USA have signed one initiative called the Trust Initiative. It's called the Transforming Relationship Utilizing Strategic Technologies, the Trust Initiative. And guys, although it's a topic of international relations, this trip itself has been historic, guys. There have been a lot of international relations related issues like nuclear deal and such things have happened. But what is my concern here from the subject of science and tech, that we should know what are the critical minerals that have been in news related to this Trust Initiative. So guys, back in 2023 itself, under the Joe Biden's administration, India already became a part of Mineral Security Finance Network and Mineral Security Partnership. We already became a part of Mineral Security Partnership, MSP of USA, in 2023, and last year we already became a member of Mineral Security Finance Network. So India and USA were already partnering in critical minerals already in the past 2-3 years, right? Now what exactly is trust? So trust is nothing but a follow-up project of the past developments. So it is basically for increasing our cooperation in the recovery and processing of critical minerals, including lithium and rare earth elements. So what are these critical minerals? Critical minerals basically are those minerals, like if I put it in a simple way, they are basically those kind of nutrients. Like if you talk about vitamins for our body, we can survive without vitamins also, right? We can survive without vitamins, but if you talk about proper functioning of the body, we need vitamins, right? So we may not require, vitamins in high doses. We require a small dose of vitamins compared to carbohydrates, fats and proteins. We may not require vitamins in the same quantity, but yes, the vitamins play a very important role in maintaining our proper functioning. In the same way, when you talk about modern electronics, like, laptops or computers or mobile phones, green energy, renewable energy solutions, or even military equipments, there are a lot of requirement of some critical minerals. They may be small in quantity, but their impact is very high. Remember guys, lithium ion battery contains just 2.5% of lithium. 95-97% of the entire battery is mostly graphite and nickel. It contains only 2.5%. Out of all the percentage of minerals, only 2.5% is lithium. But it is still called the lithium ion battery because lithium is a critical mineral in that entire battery. So critical minerals are those that may be required in small quantities, but they have a very high utility. So we have some examples here. Lithium and cobalt are two very good examples of critical minerals which are used in lithium-ion batteries, and they are the backbone of all electric vehicles today. Then we have some other rare earth which is also rare earth and critical. We have neodymium and we have dysprosium, which are key in making powerful magnets used in wind turbines, headphones and hard drives. Graphite is again a critical mineral, not a rare earth element, but a critical mineral used in batteries, like I said already, in nuclear reactors and also as lubricants. Then other critical minerals include nickel, manganese, tantalum. All these are major critical minerals. Now guys, there is already a concern. So when this particular agreement or this initiative has been signed between India and USA, there is already a concern related to environment, ethical as well as geopolitical concerns. If I talk about geopolitical only, you will notice that most countries who are having the monopoly in critical mineral includes China. Approximately 70% of the global rare earth and critical mineral is produced in China. So you can easily understand it can create a next generation of trade war. It can create monopoly in electronic and manufacturing industry. So this becomes a very important geopolitical move where India and USA has partnered. But at the same time, if India and USA also start promoting, critical minerals and their extraction and their processing, then it of course will bring in a lot of environmental and ethical concerns. Ethical concerns is on the basis of labor, on the basis of tribal rights, because most of the locations where these critical minerals are found, they are in forest, mostly inhabited by indigenous tribal population. And in terms of environmental, it is mostly related to the impacts of mining these critical minerals on the environment, because these are rare earth and less in quantity. So there's a high chance that you will be unearthing a lot of minerals, and then from there a very small quantity of these critical minerals may be received. So there is no doubt that this critical mineral will bring in a lot of attention from the context of environment, ethical and geopolitical point of view. Now guys, I'm moving on to the last part of our discussion. This is technically the extension of the discussion that we had in the last class, that we had in the last week's discussion. So this is data protection rules. So guys, in the last class I had talked about the Data Protection Act that was introduced in 2023, and based on this act, Government of India was committed to introduce data protection rules. Although the final rules are yet to be introduced, but in January 2025 the draft rules on data protection were announced, and let's look at an overview of the draft rules. They are not very different, but it is a way to understand how India is looking ahead in the realm of data security. So guys, you can understand in the past 5 years only there have been major data breaches reported in India. In 2019, State Bank of India server leak was an important news. Then Just Dial, another company, Upstock, Domino's India, Big Basket, Air India, MobiKwik, these are all the events where data breaches were observed, and you can see that millions and millions of data of Indian users were shared on the dark web. Now, to address such issues that these things should not happen in future, we have the data protection, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023, under which in January 2025 we got the draft digital data protection rules. Remember guys, these are just the draft rules that that Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has notified, and the actual rules are going to be studied after the draft has been introduced. People are supposed to give suggestions. 18th of February was the last date where people were allowed to give suggestions, and now the ministry will read all those suggestions. They will work out and introduce their final rules. Now guys, the draft rules are basically having details about various implementation aspects of the DPDP Act. So the objective is to implement the DPDP Act. So to implement it, what have been the initiatives taken? Remember guys, the term data fiduciary is the organization that is having your data, and you being an individual whose data or who have the data or whose data has been put on with these data fiduciaries, you're called data principal. So remember, data principal are the individuals and data fiduciaries are the organization that are keeping your data. So guys, the rules have been set here. The draft rule contains things like notice by the data fiduciary to the individuals. So for any kind of data, how far it will be used for any kind of things, there has to be proper consent taken from the data principals, right? Individuals. Registration obligation of consent manager. So there has to be a consent manager appointed, right? In every a data fiduciary who will make sure that these consents are taken for every step, for every change in the terms and condition. You have to take consent from the individual. Then processing of personal data, right, for issuance of subsidy, benefits, services, etc. by the state. So how much for the consent manager will have to take the consent if how much data has to be processed for any kind of state sponsored services. Applicability of reasonable security safeguards, whatever the security safeguards that has to be there, maintained by the data fiduciary, whatever information an individual should have, or a data principal should have, all these things. Then it also has the procedure for intimation of personal data breach. If there is any personal data breach, it is the responsibility under the draft notification that within 72 hours of the data breach, the data principals have to be notified. They have to be intimated that your data has been breached, right? Then providing details about availing their rights by the individuals. So that the consent manager will have to also make sure that all individuals know about their rights as data principals. What are their rights? So they can stop the data, they have to give the consent every time. All these rights also have to be delivered. Then processing of personal data of child or of person with disability. So this also has been put up here. Any kind of data that involves children less than 18 years or person with disability, their data also have to be first taken by consent of the guardians or anyone who has the legal guardian of the child. Then setting up data protection board. So there has to be a data protection board that Government of India, that ministry has to set up. So the draft rules also had the procedure for appointment, service conditions of the chairperson and other members of the board, functioning of the board as a digital office. All these things are there mentioned in the draft rules. Then the draft rule also talks about procedure for appeal to the appellate tribunal in the case of any event that occurs in that violates the rules, data protection rules. And guys, the rules also mention a point on data localization, where MIT has asked for certain data that has to be stored within India. Some data has to be stored within India with a white list of countries deemed acceptable for data transfer. So MIT is expected to introduce a certain list where, if you remember, I had also talked about if the data has to be shared with other countries, cross-border transfer of data. So data localization, some of the data has to be kept in India only, depending on some sensitive information that should not go out of the country. But other data that is allowed to go out, there has to be a white list prepared for countries where the data can be sent, or they are allowed to accept the data. So this is where we have come up with data localization, right? So this is what we have. Now, the key objectives of the draft rules are very simple. The objectives are simple, that we have to strengthen data privacy in our country, ensure that personal data is processed ethically and securely, respecting individual privacy rights. Second is to promote transparency and accountability, mandate clear disclosures and hold organizations accountable for their data processing activities. Then facilitate digital economy growth, create a regulatory environment that fosters innovation while protecting personal data. And then lastly, we have aligned with the global standards, harmonize India's data protection framework with international best practices, enabling smoother cross-border data flows. So these are the 4 objectives that we have for the draft rules. And guys, what challenges are expected? So these challenges I have taken from the various newspaper articles that has come up in the last 1 month, and it includes mostly 4 challenges. Balancing innovation and regulation. We have to ensure that we have the right stringent data protection laws, but also we have to balance technological innovation in the country. So this data protection law should not be in such a way that it will hinder any further technological innovation, because data is required for most innovation in AI. Then guys, small and medium enterprises, they are already having difficulties in maintaining their profits, in maintaining their companies working. For them, meeting compliances would be a difficult thing. So without a substantive support given to them, meeting compliance regulations would be difficult for small and medium enterprises. Then enforcement consistencies, achieving uniform enforcement across diverse industries and regions, avoiding selective and uneven application of the law. So this is going to be the important concern of the implementation agencies, that across the sectors, across diverse industries and sector, the data has to be protected in the same consistency. And lastly, the addressing data localization debates. Now there are debates compared between Indian and the European standard. Like in European standards, all data has to be put locally, right? All data has to be put locally. In India, we have given a somewhat much more lenient approach, where only some of the data has to be kept locally and rest of the data can be stored outside the country also. So these kind of debates will always be there, depending on how much of the data is allowed to be sent out. That is yet to be seen, right? So ongoing discussions about whether the data should be stored locally might resurface, influencing global business strategies. So being a global economy, it is important that some of the data should go out, but at the same time, being a sovereign nation, it is important to keep most of the data inside the country itself. So this is a debate. So many large scale companies who do not have a data center in India, they have been objecting regarding what kind of data localization laws India would have. So I hope you guys are able to understand. This includes the entire discussion that I'm supposed to take in today's Focus Weekly. We'll be meeting next week, and next week I'll be talking about quantum computing and its development in India. I'll mostly be talking about the development of quantum computing, because most of the topics of quantum computing I've already discussed in the class. So I'll be mostly talking about the developments in the area of quantum science development in the country. All right. So this is everything in today's class. We'll be meeting next week. All the best, guys. Thank you.